Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history in the northern Cascade Mountains of Washington state. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The radio crackled to life at exactly 37 a.m. on October 12, 1959. The night dispatch operator at Olympic National Forest Ranger Station, Marlene Voss, would later testify that the voice on the other end was barely recognizable as belonging to Senior Ranger Harlan Mercer. "There's something wrong with this place," the voice had said. Static interrupted the transmission for 12 seconds before Mercer's voice returned. "The coordinates don't match any survey. This cabin, it's not on any map." Then the radio went silent for 23 days. The disappearance of Ranger Harlan Mercer might have remained just another mysterious vanishing in the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest were it not for the journal discovered during the subsequent search operation. The leather-bound notebook contained entries spanning from October 9 to November 2, 1959, 11 days beyond the date of Mercer's final radio transmission. According to official Forest Service records, the search party that located the journal never found Ranger Mercer himself. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the discrepancy in the official reports. The coordinates where the journal was recovered correspond to no cabin or structure in any Forest Service survey conducted before or since. Yet Mercer's journal describes in increasingly fractured handwriting a two-story cabin with a stone foundation nestled in a small clearing, a structure that, according to all official records, has never existed. Harlan Mercer had served as a ranger at Olympic National Forest for 17 years prior to his disappearance. Colleagues described him as methodical, level-headed, and extraordinarily familiar with the territory under his jurisdiction. "If anyone knew every inch of the northern section, it was Harlan," said former Forest Supervisor Vernon Whitaker in an interview conducted in 1961. "The man could navigate those woods blindfolded. That's what makes his final report so unsettling." The autumn of 1959 had been unusually cold and wet in the Pacific Northwest. Rainfall records from Seattle show precipitation at 142% above average for September and October. Rivers were swollen and several logging roads had been washed out entirely. It was during a routine survey of storm damage that Ranger Mercer first noted what he called an anomaly in his patrol notes. On October 9, 3 days before his final radio transmission, Mercer wrote, "Discovered unusual trail branching northwest from milepost 27 on Coldwater Road. Trail appears recently used despite heavy rainfall. Not marked on current survey maps. We'll investigate tomorrow if weather permits." The following day's entry reads, "Weather cleared briefly. Followed unmarked trail approximately 3.7 miles from the road. Path shows signs of regular use, but doesn't match any recreational or service route on forest maps. Noted unusual silence. No bird calls or wildlife sounds for the final mile of hiking. We'll return with proper equipment to map this section tomorrow." What Ranger Mercer found on October 11 would dramatically change the tone of his usually clinical reports. His journal entry from that date spans 4 pages and includes several detailed sketches. The handwriting, normally precise and measured, becomes increasingly agitated as the entry progresses. Located structure at coordinates 47°51 pu for N 123°4018 7W 2-story cabin approximately 24x36 font cedar shingle exterior with stone foundation structure appears well maintained despite no record of private property or permitted buildings in this sector. No vehicle access possible. Nearest road terminus is 3.7 miles southeast. Later in the same entry, perimeter inspection reveals multiple inconsistencies. Building materials appear weathered, suggesting decades of exposure, yet fallen leaves and forest debris around foundation indicate recent construction. No footpaths worn into surrounding soil despite apparent regular use of main trail. No chimney smoke despite interior fireplace visible through windows. No response to verbal hails. Mercer's training protocol would have dictated immediate reporting of an unauthorized structure, followed by documentation and notification to his superiors. Instead, his journal indicates he made camp approximately 300 yards from the cabin, intending to investigate further the following morning. His radio check-in that evening mentioned only routine patrol activities. The journal entry for October 12, the date of his final radio transmission, begins normally. Dawn broke at 6:23. Heavy ground fog obscuring visibility beyond 50 yards. Temperature approximately 38 degrees still visible through mist. No signs of occupancy observed during night watch. Aratim at Lero 9:30. Mercer recorded approaching the cabin directly. Door unlocked. Interior appears lived in. Furniture, supplies, personal effects present. Wood stacked by fireplace is dry. Ash and grate is cold but recent. Food supplies in kitchen area uncontaminated. Several books on shelves, primarily surveying manuals, and local history. No photographs or identifying documents visible. What Mercer discovered next appears to have profoundly disturbed him. His handwriting deteriorates noticeably and several words are crossed out or written over multiple times. Found Ranger logbook on desk entries dated 1959 current to October 11. Handwriting matches heavily scratched out section. This is impossible. Pages describe patrol route identical to mine. Final entry describes discovery of unmarked trail leading to this location. Cabin contains my equipment arranged as I would arrange it. Jacket hanging by door is identical to standard issue with my service patch and ID number. The remainder of the October 12 entry consists of a series of increasingly disjointed observations. Mercer notes that the coordinates he recorded place the cabin's location in the middle of a steep ravine, a topographical impossibility given the flat clearing where he stood. He also observed that his compass displayed erratic readings inside the structure with the needle spinning continuously when placed on certain surfaces. At 1,517 hours, Mercer recorded his decision to radio for assistance. This corresponds with the transmission received by dispatch operator Marlene Voss. The journal indicates he intended to establish a perimeter and wait for backup. The final line of that day's entry reads, "We'll maintain observation from tree line until support arrives." Something is wrong with the dimensions of this place. Shadows fall at incorrect angles inside. The most disturbing aspects of this case emerge in the subsequent entries, the ones dated after Ranger Mercer's final radio contact. While Forest Service officials initially dismissed these as fabrications or evidence of psychological distress, several forensic analyses of the journal conducted between 1960 and 1968 confirmed consistent ink composition and handwriting throughout the document. October 13, no sign of backup team, radio receiving static only. Slept in shifts through night. Cabin occupant has not appeared. Attempted to hike out this morning to reach patrol vehicle, but trail now extends beyond previous endpoints. Walked for 3 hours before realizing I was moving in a circle. Tree markers I placed led back to clearing cabin unchanged. Will attempt different direction tomorrow. October 14, trail disorientation continues. Each attempt to leave returns to clearing regardless of direction taken. Compass readings unreliable. Sun position contradicts time measurements. Cloud formations repeat in identical patterns at hourly intervals. Cabin remains unoccupied, yet shows signs of recent habitation each morning. Found fresh coffee in pot today, though I did not prepare any. By October 16, Mercer's entries suggest he had made the difficult decision to shelter in the cabin rather than continue fruitless attempts to leave or sleep exposed to the elements. The psychological toll of his situation becomes increasingly apparent in his writings. Sleep comes differently inside these walls. Dreams are vivid and consistent. I am watching myself from the tree-in. As I approach the cabin for the first time, the perspective shifts repeatedly. Inside looking out, outside looking in, the boundaries feel thin. A particularly unsettling entry from October 19 reads, "Found another journal today, hidden between mattress and frame and bedroom." Contents identical to my current entries up to yesterday. Handwriting is mine. Paper and binding match Forest Service standard issue. Final page contains entry dated October 26 that I have not written yet. Will not read ahead. Sealed it in my pack. The mystery deepened when, according to a 1962 internal investigation, Forest Service records confirmed that a search party was indeed dispatched on October 13, the day after Mercer's final transmission. Led by Rangers Donovan Walsh and Seymour Gideon, the team reported following Mercer's last known coordinates, but finding no trail matching his description. After 4 days of intensive searching in deteriorating weather conditions, the operation was downgraded to a recovery mission rather than a rescue. Yet, Mercer's journal entries continue through this period, depicting an increasingly surreal experience. October 21. Time passes incorrectly here. Watch stopped at 3:17. Matches time of radio call 5 days ago, though it feels longer. Cabin seems to expand at night. Counted steps from front door to back wall. 37 paces after dark, 22 in daylight. Dimension should be impossible given external measurements. October 23 found scratches inside closet door today. Tally marks grouped in sets of 5. Counted 142 marks below them in handwriting resembling mine. Cycles completed. Started hearing voice last night coming through. Heating great voice is my own. Reciting my journal entries before I write them. By October 25, Mercer's writing shows signs of severe sleep deprivation and possible psychological breakdown. He describes the cabin as breathing and claims to have witnessed the structure fold in on itself at precisely 3:17 each morning, revealing the same rooms arranged in impossible configurations. The October 26 entry is particularly significant as it supposedly matches the future entry Mercer had discovered in the hidden journal a week earlier. The ranger arrives tomorrow. I watch from the trees as he discovers the trail. I have left everything in place as it was left for me. The cycle requires continuity. Perhaps this time will be different. Perhaps this time I will warn him away. On October 29, Mercer wrote what appears to be his most lucid reflection. I understand now. This isn't the first cabin. It's the only cabin experienced repeatedly. The Forest Service will find this journal as they found it before. They will dismiss these entries. The next ranger will come. The coordinates will lead nowhere until they need to lead somewhere. The trail appears when it needs to appear. The final entry dated November 2 consists of a single line. I am going outside now. I believe I see myself approaching through the trees. When the journal was finally discovered on November 4, 1959, it was found inside a standard-issue Forest Service backpack placed in the hollow of a large cedar tree. The search team, which had been systematically grid-searching the area for over 3 weeks, was adamant that they had checked that specific location multiple times previously. Most disturbing of all, the coordinates recorded in Mercer's journal, the supposed location of the cabin, corresponded to a sheer rock face dropping over 200 feet to a riverbed below. Senior geologist Hamilton Pierce from the U.S. Geological Survey brought in to consult on the case in 1960 confirmed that the topography of the location had remained unchanged for at least 5,100 years with no evidence of any clearing or structural foundation ever having existed there. The official report filed November 18, 1959 listed Ranger Harlan Mercer as missing, presumed deceased due to exposure or accident in the line of duty. The journal was classified as evidence and stored in the Regional Forest Service archives. In 1968, during the process of microfilming historical records, archive technicians reported that the journal could not be located despite being properly logged in the inventory system. What gives this case its particularly disturbing quality is not merely the disappearance of an experienced ranger or the discovery of an anomalous journal. Rather, it is the subsequent events that occurred in the decades following. In 1963, Ranger Donovan Walsh, who had participated in the original search for Mercer, filed an incident report describing the discovery of an unmarked trail branching northwest from milepost 27 on Coldwater Road, the exact location mentioned in Mercer's first journal entry. Walsh's report indicates he followed the trail for approximately 1 mile before turning back due to approaching darkness. His request for a follow-up investigation was denied by Supervisor Whitaker, who had retired from service the following month. In 1967, 2 backpackers reported seeking shelter in an abandoned cabin during a sudden storm. The coordinates they provided placed them in a section of Olympic National Forest with no registered structures. When rangers investigated 3 days later, they found no cabin and no clearing. Only dense forest and underbrush showing no signs of recent disturbance. Perhaps most significant is the report filed in 1972 by Ranger Julen Caldwell, who had no knowledge of the Mercer incident. While conducting a wildlife survey, she reported finding a weathered journal inside a hollow cedar tree. According to her statement, the journal contained entries from an unidentified ranger describing a cabin that existed in the same space as multiple other cabins. Before she could return to the ranger station with this evidence, a sudden landslide necessitated emergency evacuation of her survey team. The journal was reportedly lost during the evacuation. The most recent documented connection to the Mercer case occurred in 1981 when a routine audit of Forest Service personnel records revealed an anomaly. In the staff directory for Olympic National Forest under rangers assigned to the North District appeared the name Harlan Mercer with a hire date of October 9, 1980, exactly 21 years after Mercer's original discovery of the unmarked trail. When questioned, the administrative clerk responsible for maintaining the records had no recollection of adding the name and no personnel file could be located. The entry was dismissed as a clerical error, possibly resulting from someone accessing historical records during the system update. The area where Mercer disappeared was largely reclaimed by wilderness in the following decades. In 1984, a severe storm caused massive flooding and landslides throughout the region, permanently altering many topographical features. Coldwater Road was partially rerouted and milepost 27, the landmark in Mercer's initial report, no longer exists on current maps. What happened to Ranger Harlan Mercer? The official stance remains unchanged. A tragic case of an experienced outdoorsman who became disoriented in severe weather, with the journal entries reflecting the psychological deterioration of a man facing mortality alone in the wilderness. The references to impossible architecture and temporal anomalies are attributed to hypothermia, which is known to cause hallucinations and cognitive distortions. Yet certain details resist this comfortable explanation. The forensic analysis confirming that all journal entries were written with the same ink and by the same hand. The consistent testimonies from unrelated witnesses describing similar phenomena in the same general area over a span of decades. The inexplicable presence of Mercer's name and personnel records 21 years after his disappearance. In 1962, during the internal investigation, one of Mercer's colleagues provided a statement that was subsequently redacted from the official report. Ranger Edmund Kovat stated, "Harlan told me something the week before he disappeared that I didn't think much of at the time. He said he'd been having the same dream repeatedly, that he was walking through the forest and came upon himself sitting in a cabin. He said in the dream he always had the same thought. This time I'll tell him not to stay. I asked what he meant, but he just shook his head and said it probably came from spending too much time alone in the woods." Perhaps the most plausible theory, if one can use plausible in this context, comes from Dr. Lydia Montgomery, a geophysicist who studied magnetic anomalies in the Olympic Peninsula during the late 1960s. While her research focused primarily on navigational disturbances affecting aircraft, she noted several terrestrial blind spots where magnetic readings became unpredictable. In a footnote to her published findings, she referenced the Mercer case, specifically certain locations within the survey area exhibit properties consistent with theoretical fold points in spacetime. Regions where conventional physical laws governing three-dimensional space may temporarily operate according to alternative parameters. These anomalies appear transient rather than fixed, which explains the difficulty in documenting them consistently. If Ranger Mercer's account is taken at face value, it suggests he may have encountered such a phenomenon. Dr. Montgomery's career suffered following the publication of her study, and she abandoned this line of research shortly thereafter. Her field notes and raw data were archived at the University of Washington, but were reportedly destroyed in a storage facility fire in 1973. The forests of the Olympic Peninsula continue to draw hikers, campers, and nature enthusiasts from around the world. Occasionally, visitors report strange experiences, periods of unnatural silence, trails that seem to lead in circles despite straightforward terrain, the feeling of being watched from within the dense forest canopy. Park rangers generally attribute these accounts to the disorienting nature of old-growth forests, where massive trees can obscure landmarks and create natural echo chambers. Official Forest Service policy now requires rangers to patrol in pairs within the region where Mercer disappeared. When asked about this protocol during a budget review in 1993, Regional Supervisor Carlton Merritt stated it was a standard safety measure for particularly remote terrain. However, internal documents obtained through a Freedom of Information request in 1997 reveal a different directive. Personnel are advised to immediately report any structures not appearing on current survey maps and to retreat to established ranger stations without further investigation. The Mercer case file was officially closed in 1969, 10 years after his disappearance, when the statutory period for maintaining active missing persons investigations expired. The journal's last known location was Archival Box 47C in the Olympic National Forest Regional Office. When journalists attempted to access it in 1985 for a retrospective on historical mysteries of the Pacific Northwest, they were informed that the file contained only standard incident reports. No journal was included in the inventory. What remains is a story that defies conventional explanation. A ranger with impeccable credentials and intimate knowledge of the terrain, who encountered something that exists both nowhere and everywhere in the deep woods of the Olympic Peninsula. A cabin that appears where no cabin should be possible, a structure that, according to Mercer's final theories, exists in some space adjacent to our reality, occasionally becoming accessible to those who happen upon the right trail at the right time. For those who patrol the forests today, Mercer's disappearance has faded into the category of wilderness folklore, a cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation and the unforgiving nature of the backcountry. Yet, in certain ranger stations throughout the Pacific Northwest, an unofficial protocol remains in place. If you discover an unmarked trail that doesn't appear on your maps, particularly near old mile markers, mark your location clearly. Report the anomaly immediately and under no circumstances follow where it leads. In the winter of 1962, almost exactly 3 years after Mercer's disappearance, a survey team mapping erosion patterns near the original search area reported an unusual finding. During a break in a severe winter storm, team leader Garrison Westfield observed what appeared to be light from a cabin window approximately half a mile from their position. Given the hazardous conditions, he chose not to investigate, instead making a note of compass bearings and approximate distance. When weather conditions improved the following day, the team found only unbroken forest in the direction Westfield had indicated. No evidence of any structure or clearing was visible. In his field notes, later submitted with the team's geological survey, Westfield wrote, "Possible light source observed 111,462 bearing 293 degrees from Camp Point Alpha Isters distance 05 m. Subsequent investigation revealed no structure or evidence of human activity. Strange phenomenon possibly attributable to reflection of survey team's own lights against low cloud ceiling during storm conditions." A handwritten annotation appears in the margin next to this entry, apparently added during review, or he saw what Mercer saw. Consider reassignment of personnel from North District Surveys VW. The initials match those of Vernon Whitaker, who had supervised Mercer and officially retired in 1963. The forests of the Olympic Peninsula hold many secrets. Ancient trees that stood before European settlement, hidden valleys virtually untouched by human presence, wildlife rarely glimpsed by human eyes. Among those who work these woods, there persists a quiet understanding that certain things defy explanation. Certain experiences remain private, discussed only among those who might understand. In 1999, during renovation of the Olympic Park headquarters, workers discovered a sealed envelope behind a loose panel in what had once been Vernon Whitaker's office. The envelope, yellowed with age, contained a single sheet of paper with a hand-drawn map. At the center was a small rectangle marked anomaly with the precise coordinates matching those in Mercer's journal. Written across the bottom in faded ink. It returns every 21 years. Next window. October 2001. May God forgive what I've done. The current whereabouts of this map remain unknown. When contacted for comment, the Olympic National Forest Administration stated no knowledge of any such document. Perhaps the final word on the Mercer case belongs to Dr. Montgomery, who in a rarely cited interview given shortly before her death in 1988, offered this reflection. The universe is far stranger than our sciences currently comprehend. There are places, certain locations, where reality itself appears to fold or wrinkle, not permanently, but cyclically, like fabric bunching when pressed from an angle we cannot perceive. What Ranger Mercer encountered may simply have been a moment when our world briefly touched another possibility of itself. The hiking trails of Olympic National Forest remain some of the most beautiful in America. Millions of visitors safely traverse these ancient woods each year. But among experienced backcountry rangers, a certain protocol remains unwritten yet understood. If your maps and compass disagree, trust your compass. If your compass begins to spin, retrace your steps immediately. And if you ever find yourself on a trail that wasn't there before, leading to a clearing that seems too perfect with a cabin that looks somehow familiar, do not enter. Mark your location if possible. Then turn around and don't look back. Because somewhere in those deep woods, if certain theories are correct, Ranger Harlan Mercer might still be watching from a window or perhaps from the tree inn, waiting for the next traveler to break the cycle or become part of it. The last official mention of the case appears in a Forest Service memorandum dated June 7, 1968. All personnel are reminded that discussion of the Mercer incident with unauthorized individuals constitutes a violation of confidentiality protocols. The official determination remains unchanged. Ranger H. Mercer, missing in line of duty, presumed deceased due to natural causes. All speculative documentation has been removed from permanent records as per Directive 173. The memorandum bears the signature stamp of Regional Director Conrad Blackwood, who had no direct connection to the original case, but had apparently reviewed the material shortly before they were scheduled for microfilm archiving, the same process during which the journal was reportedly lost. What truly happened to Ranger Harlan Mercer in those woods in October 1959? Did he simply become lost and succumb to the elements, his journal entries reflecting a mind unraveling under extreme conditions? Did he encounter some unexplainable phenomenon that exists beyond our understanding of physical reality? Or is there something in those ancient forests that occasionally reveals itself? A place that exists in parallel to our world, accessible only under certain conditions to certain individuals. The forests keep their secrets. The trails change with the seasons. And sometimes when the light falls just right through the towering canopy, shadows seem to form patterns that shouldn't be possible given the positions of the trees casting them. Rangers now work in pairs. Maps are updated seasonally. And if anyone discovers a trail not marked on those maps, protocol dictates immediate reporting without further investigation. Somewhere in those woods, according to local legend, there's a cabin that appears only when it chooses to be found. And inside, perhaps a ranger still keeps watch, making entries in a journal that will eventually find its way back into the world. A record of impossibility that challenges everything we think we understand about the nature of reality itself. In the decades following Mercer's disappearance, numerous researchers, both official and amateur, have attempted to piece together what might have happened in those woods. The National Weather Service records from October 1959 confirm an unusual meteorological pattern over the Olympic Peninsula during the period in question. A persistent low-pressure system that created what meteorologists referred to as a stationary atmospheric anomaly. Barometric readings from weather stations throughout the region showed inexplicable fluctuations, particularly during the early morning hours between 30 and 4:00 a.m. While these readings were dismissed at the time as equipment malfunctions, retrospective analysis conducted in 1976 suggested they might indicate what physicist Dr. Abram Silverstein called localized gravitational distortion events. The implication of such phenomena, if they exist, remains contentious within the scientific community. Theoretical models suggest that certain combinations of geological, magnetic, and atmospheric conditions could potentially create isolated areas where spacetime operates according to slightly altered parameters. The dense old-growth forests of the Olympic Peninsula with their unique combination of iron-rich soil deposits, ancient magnetic rock formations, and isolated weather patterns present an environment where such theoretical anomalies might be more likely to manifest, however temporarily. One aspect of the Mercer case that receives little attention in official documentation is the series of unusual radio transmissions recorded by the ranger station in the days following Mercer's disappearance. Night dispatcher Marlene Voss, who received Mercer's final official transmission, reported 3 subsequent instances of fragmentary communication on Ranger Mercer's frequency. These brief bursts of static-filled transmission contained what Voss described as portions of sentences played backward or overlapping. While technology in 1959 had no means to properly analyze such audio anomalies, Voss maintained until her retirement in 1981 that she recognized Mercer's voice in these transmissions despite their distorted quality. Her official statement given during the 1962 internal investigation includes this observation. "What disturbed me most wasn't just hearing Harlan's voice days after we'd given up hope. It was that in one of the transmissions he seemed to be responding to questions I hadn't yet asked, as if he were having a conversation that hadn't happened yet." This statement was redacted from the final report. The search for Mercer involved more than just Forest Service personnel. Local volunteers from nearby communities joined the effort, including several members of the Quinault Indian tribe, whose ancestral lands encompass portions of what is now Olympic National Forest. According to an account published in the tribal newsletter in 1963, Elder Joseph Silverwolf had warned against searching in certain areas of the forest, particularly during the phase of the moon, corresponding to the October 1959 disappearance. When interviewed by a Seattle Times reporter in 1965, Silverwolf explained, "Our stories tell of places in the deep woods where the world thins, where a person might step through into somewhere else, or when else. These places don't stay fixed. They move like shadows as the seasons change. The old ones knew to avoid them." When asked specifically about the Mercer case, Silverwolf replied that Ranger found one of the thin places. "Perhaps he's still there, or perhaps he's everywhere along that same trail now. Time doesn't flow straight in those spots." The potential connection between indigenous knowledge and the anomalous events surrounding Mercer's disappearance was largely disregarded by official investigators. Yet, Forest Service internal memos from 1964 show that several areas within the Olympic National Forest were quietly designated as restricted zones with access limited to authorized personnel only. The stated reason was ecological sensitivity, but the boundaries of these zones correspond closely with areas traditionally avoided by indigenous hunters and gatherers. According to anthropological studies conducted in the 1950s, these restricted areas were quietly open to general access again in the 1980s, but certain sections remain under seasonal closure orders that rotate according to no publicly disclosed pattern. The topographical irregularities surrounding the coordinates where Mercer claimed to have found the cabin present. Another puzzling element of the case. In 1961, Forest Service crafter Wallace Thornon attempted to reconcile the discrepancies between Mercer's journal descriptions and the actual terrain. His report, classified until 1977, contains this observation. "If we assume Ranger Mercer's coordinates are accurate, then we must also accept that the terrain he described cannot exist at that location. However, I've discovered an interesting anomaly. If we translate his coordinates approximately 0.37 miles west-northwest and apply them to topographical surveys from 1937, we find a perfect match for his described clearing. This area was subsequently altered by a landslide in 1941, transforming it into the ravine that exists today. In essence, Ranger Mercer provided coordinates for a location as it existed 22 years earlier." Thornton's report concludes with a question that remains unanswered. How could Mercer have known the precise coordinates for a clearing that hadn't existed for over 2 decades before his birth? The forest itself seems to resist definitive investigation. In 1979, a University of Washington research team attempted to conduct a comprehensive geological and magnetic survey of the area surrounding Mercer's last known coordinates. According to their preliminary report, equipment malfunctions plagued the expedition from the outset. Compasses showed erratic readings. Batteries drained inexplicably fast, and recording devices captured only static or silence, even when team members were speaking directly into microphones. After 3 days of increasingly frustrating attempts to gather usable data, the team was forced to abandon the project when 2 members became severely disoriented despite clear weather conditions and reportedly walked in circles for 4 hours while believing they were traveling in a straight line. The university declined to fund a follow-up expedition, citing inconclusive preliminary findings and excessive equipment losses. There is perhaps something about the deep forests of the Olympic Peninsula that defies conventional understanding. The ancient trees, some standing for over 1,000 years, create a canopy so dense that sunlight reaches the forest floor only in fragmented shifting patterns. Sound behaves strangely, sometimes carrying for unusual distances, other times seeming to be absorbed completely by the moss-covered trunks and dense undergrowth. Fog forms and dissipates with unnerving suddenness, and time itself seems to move differently there. Hikers frequently report the disorienting sensation of having spent what felt like hours on a trail only to discover that mere minutes have passed according to their watches or vice versa. Most attribute these experiences to the natural disorienting effects of the wilderness. But for those familiar with the Mercer case, these accounts carry echoes of something more profound. In 1987, retired forest ranger Seymour Gideon, who had participated in the original search for Mercer, gave an interview to a small local newspaper in Port Angeles. Rarely cited in official discussions of the case, this interview contains what might be the most disturbing first-hand account connected to the Mercer disappearance. On the fourth day of the search, I separated from my team briefly, just stepping aside for a moment of privacy, you understand. I wasn't more than 30 yards from the others, but suddenly I couldn't hear them. The forest had gone completely silent, and there was this trail I hadn't noticed before, leading away through the underbrush. I followed it, maybe 100 yards, and the woods opened into a small clearing. There was no cabin there, just a flat stone about the size of a dinner plate placed exactly in the center of the clearing. On top of the stone was a Forest Service badge. I recognized the number immediately. It was Harlan's. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake some nights. The badge was new, polished, not a scratch on it, and Harlan's had been notably worn with a deep scratch across the lower right corner where he'd caught it on a fence years earlier. I reached for it, and that's when I felt something watching me from the trees. I never saw anyone or anything, but I know with absolute certainty I was not alone in that clearing. I grabbed the badge and ran back the way I'd come. When I reached the search team, they said I'd been gone less than a minute. The badge was in my hand. When I rejoined them, I know it was, but when I went to show it to the team leader, my hand was empty. I've never told this story during any official inquiry. Who would believe me? Gideon died in 1991, taking whatever additional insights he might have had about his experience to the grave. The missing journal itself represents perhaps the most tantalizing element of the entire case. Its disappearance from the Forest Service archives in 1968 might be dismissed as simple administrative mishandling were it not for a curious incident reported by archival technician Dorothy Simmons in a memo dated March 14, 1968. Tasked with preparing documents for microfilming, Simmons noted that the Mercer Journal, which she had logged and placed in archival box 47C the previous day, was missing when she opened the box the following morning. Her memo includes this observation. The strange thing is not simply that the journal was gone, but that the inventory sheet showed no record of it ever having been logged, despite my clear recollection of doing so. Even my handwritten entry from the previous day had vanished from the form. When I mentioned this to Supervisor Dawson, he had no recollection of our conversation about the journal from yesterday, though we had discussed its unusual contents at length during lunch. The matter was investigated briefly as a potential security breach, but when no evidence of tampering with the archive room locks was discovered, the case was attributed to clerical error and closed. In October 2001, exactly 21 years after the appearance of Mercer's name in the Forest Service personnel records and matching the cycle predicted in Whitaker's hidden note, a series of unusual incident reports emerged from the Olympic National Forest. 3 separate hiking groups, unconnected to each other, reported encountering what they described as an old-fashioned forest ranger on trails in the northern section of the park. According to these reports, the ranger, described as a man in his 50s, wearing what one witness called a vintage uniform, approached hikers who had strayed from marked paths, advised them to return to designated trails and then walked away into the forest. One witness, amateur photographer Russell Hammond, claimed to have taken a photograph of the ranger from a distance, but reported that when the film was developed, the figure appeared only as a dark blur against the trees, like a shadow where a person should be. Hammond's photograph was published in the Peninsula Daily News on October 28, 2001, alongside an article about increasing paranormal claims connected to the National Forest. Forest Service officials dismissed the sightings as either a practical joke or the misidentification of an actual ranger, though they confirmed no personnel were assigned to patrol those specific areas on the dates in question. The most compelling recent development in the Mercer case emerged in 2007 when renovations at the Old North District Ranger Station uncovered a sealed metal box hidden inside a wall cavity. The box, which appears to have been placed there during renovations in the early 1960s, contained several items. A Forest Service badge with an identification number matching Mercer's, a compass with a cracked face, its needle fixed pointing west-northwest, and a single sheet of paper bearing what appears to be a portion of a journal entry written in handwriting consistent with Mercer's known samples. The fragment reads, "Have discovered the pattern now. The cabin appears every 21 years, remaining accessible for 33 days. I have been here before. Will be here again." The only escape is to the remainder of the text was rendered illegible by water damage. When this discovery was reported to Forest Service headquarters, representatives arrived within hours to confiscate the items, citing historical significance to ongoing research. No official statement about the contents of the box has ever been released, and Forest Service representatives deny any knowledge of its discovery when questioned by journalists. Some researchers have suggested that the Mercer case bears similarities to other disappearances in national parks and forests throughout the Pacific Northwest. Between 1946 and 1982, 17 individuals, mostly experienced hikers or forestry workers, vanished under circumstances that investigative journalist Amelia Rutherford described in her controversial 1993 book Into Thin Air as sharing a particular pattern of anomalous elements. These common factors included disappearances during periods of unusual meteorological conditions, last known locations near unmarked or unmapped trails, and in several cases, the discovery of personal items in locations previously searched thoroughly. While mainstream scientists and law enforcement officials dismiss any paranormal connection between these cases, attributing them to the natural dangers of wilderness environments and the limitations of search operations in vast, difficult terrain, Rutherford's work has inspired a small but dedicated community of researchers who continue to investigate what they believe may be evidence of temporary spatial anomalies in specific wilderness regions. The Olympic National Forest remains one of America's most beautiful and frequently visited natural landscapes. Millions of hikers traverse its trails each year without incident, experiencing only the profound natural beauty and peaceful solitude of ancient forests, largely unchanged for centuries. Yet among those who work these woods daily, certain precautions have become standard practice, though rarely discussed with outsiders. Rangers carry backup compasses. They check in via radio at regular intervals with specific protocols for missed communications. They maintain detailed GPS logs of their movements, downloading and reviewing the data daily. And perhaps most tellingly, they operate almost exclusively in pairs or teams within certain regions of the forest, regions that correspond closely with the areas connected to the Mercer case and subsequent anomalous reports. For most visitors to the Olympic National Forest, the story of Ranger Harlan Mercer represents nothing more than an interesting piece of local folklore, a campfire story shared to give a pleasant shiver on cool Northwest evenings. For others, particularly those who study disappearances in wilderness areas, it remains an unsettling example of how even the most experienced outdoorsmen can fall victim to the disorienting effects of isolation and extreme environments. But for a small number of researchers, the Mercer case represents something far more profound. Evidence that our understanding of physical reality remains incomplete. That certain places might exist where the conventional laws of time and space operate according to different rules, and that boundaries we perceive as fixed and absolute may under specific and rare conditions become unexpectedly permeable. If you find yourself hiking the dense forests of the Olympic Peninsula and come upon an unmarked trail leading away from the established paths, conventional wisdom suggests you mark your location and turn back. The Forest Service would certainly advise against following where it leads. But if curiosity overcomes caution and you find yourself walking that unknown path, pay attention to the sounds around you. If the forest grows unusually quiet, if you notice the shadows falling at strange angles through the trees, if you feel a sudden sensation of being simultaneously watched and recognized, perhaps you're approaching one of those thin places Joseph Silverwolf described. And if you glimpse through the ancient trees ahead, what appears to be a clearing containing a cabin that somehow looks both weathered and new, both familiar and impossible. You faced the same choice Ranger Mercer faced in October 1959. The official advice would be to turn around immediately, mark your location if possible, then retrace your steps without looking back. Return to marked trails and report the anomaly to the nearest ranger station. This is the safe choice, the rational choice. But somewhere in those woods, if the more unusual theories about the Mercer case are correct, a ranger might still be watching from a window or perhaps from the tree-in, waiting for someone to break the cycle or become part of it. Waiting for someone to finally understand what he discovered in those woods over 60 years ago. Waiting for someone to read the journal entries. He may still be writing in a cabin that exists everywhere and nowhere, accessible only to those who happen to find the right trail at the right time. A cabin that, according to all official records, has never existed.